Okay. Hey, welcome everybody. I'm glad that you're here to join us for kicking off this summer series of the Big Sky SBIR Accelerator. We are running this, Dell, Mackie, and I will introduce Dell here in just a few minutes, really in response to providing more structure to some of the coaching that we do. We always do one-on-one and one-off ad hoc consulting with consultants or with clients who are pursuing SBIR or STTR throughout the year. But having some of these kind of proposal labs, we've done these for several years. We're just sort of revamping a little bit of the structure into this accelerator. And what we decided to do was to make this first version of the Big Sky Accelerator a webinar series. And then we're going to be putting this more into an official learning management system, et cetera, for future courses. But we'll also provide this access to you guys if you want that in the future when we get that kind of set up later on. It'll just have a lot more resources, but do know that we're going to be sharing that with all of you throughout this series of eight weeks. So welcome. I'm glad you're here. This first class, we are really going to be talking about really navigating the contracting agencies. What are the contracting agencies? Which ones are they? What's the difference? And then we'll give you just a little bit of that background there and set us up for week 2, where we'll dive into some of the more specific details about their solicitations. This is going to be the format for our weekly agendas as we go through this. We've done this in proposal labs before. We're going to keep that kind of same model here. We'll recap what we did before. We'll talk to anybody who's continuing on. How'd your homework go? We don't collect homework. I have taught at the university before. I don't collect homework. But we give you things for your benefit to work on from week to week, especially for those of you who are actually actively pursuing a current topic or solicitation, or you're planning on it very, very near term. We're going to talk on, we'll let you know what we're going to talk about today, what our core concepts are. We'll do a quick wrap up, and then we'll actually talk to you about some things that you can do in the meantime before we meet for the next class. And here's our weekly agenda for today. We're just going to do a little bit of a level set on SBIR, and then we're going to talk about the contracting agencies, their programs, their schedules, again, wrap up and give you some action items to take away. And with that, I want to introduce you to Dell Mackey. Dell's been involved in SBIR for years, both as a team member with SBIR awarded companies and participating in submitting applications, but then also previous to his freelancing consulting, when I snatched him up to help support us, he was sort of a counterpart to me in New Mexico, really leading their FAST program management and consulting for New Mexico. So I'm really happy to have Dell participating with me, and you're going to get to meet him in just a second. But let me give you just 2 more little bits of detail before we kick it over to the contracting agency part of the show. Important reminders. We are digging deep in this series into participating in really primarily Department of Defense and NASA as contracting agencies. We'll talk today about all of the contracting agencies. We're not going to do a deep SBIR 101. I will share, after I stop talking, a link to a YouTube of a webinar that I did a couple of months ago with kind of that basics, SBIR 101 basics, just as a refresher for anybody who wants to look at that and other things. Registrations are very, very important for any of you who are anticipating a near-term submission to SBIR. You'll want to make sure that you're getting your registrations, especially that SAM registration, in order right away. And there's much involved. Make sure all of everybody who needs access to every portal, every submission portal, SAM, et cetera, has their appropriate registrations and qualifications. So that stuff takes time. So we want to make sure that you're doing that. We're not really talking about that in this series, but we're here to help support you and connect you with resources and make sure that you're doing that. And then set yourself up for success. Organize your system, your proposal management system. A very, very simple structure is available you can download it. You can view it in just download the structure from our Google Drive here. But again, anything that helps you to organize your documents that you need to submit for proposals, certainly set that up. And again, you can try that example that I have linked there, and you'll get a copy of these slides. So I said we're not doing a deep SBIR 101, but let's do a little bit of a mini SBIR 101. Let's level set here. The SBIR programs are the largest amount of small business research and development funding available, bar none. It is over $5 billion, I believe now. Over 4,000 companies in recent years each year are funded with SBIR. And so we'd love for you guys to be one of them. These programs started back in the 80s. And again, I will not go into all of the details of things, but it is incredible non-dilutive funding. And you retain your IP, your company has full rights to everything that you develop here. So it is an incredible source of funding for those of you who are developing that. It also is, while people may have concerns about DEI, I do want to stress these are merit-based programs. So that means it is available to anybody. If you have a good idea, if you have the technical expertise, if you have the business expertise to aggressively commercialize this could be a great source of funding for you to help develop that really next generation innovation technical product and take that to the marketplace. So while it is across the board, there are going to be a lot more companies in California and Massachusetts. Montana has a very high relative, per capita rate of success in SBIR. So I want you to know that and stay focused on what you need to do to make sure that your company can succeed here. And again, finally, how does this work? You guys have seen a similar slide in any SBIR presentation that you've done, whether it's a specific agency presentation or a general one like we've done before. You have 3 phases. Phase 1 is that feasibility. You can enter in at phase 1. Some agencies, like DoD and NASA, may allow you to enter in at the phase 2 level. But phase 1 is feasibility to prove the concept. Phase 2 is really technology development. Maybe you get to a minimum viable product. There might be a little bit more that's needed. There might be some additional demonstration or field testing that may be required. But the goal is going to be phase 3. And in general, sometimes we just generally say phase 3 means just you commercialize it. Awesome. When we're talking about contracting agencies, and actually really any federal agency and really any SBIR, but there is that opportunity to leverage what they call phase 3 contracts. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, and I'll share a link later on where you can learn a little bit more about what does that mean to have phase 3 contracts. But in general, phase 3 is not really SBIR dollars. It is really just you've been able to secure acquisition contracts or additional R&D through an agency to continue or to sell your product into that agency or program. Now I get to introduce you to Del. I'm going to let him take it from here. Del, and actually, if you want to take over, I can do that too. I'll give that to you.
Yep, I can.
But Del, give him a little background about you while we're shifting things over.
Well, let me get the slides up here real fast.
Okay.
Okay. Well, and hello there, everyone. Good afternoon, I assume, for most of y'all, but if you're in Hawaii like me, good morning still. But as Ann mentioned, my name is Del Mackey. I have a company that I actually own. It's a company of one, but hey, it's a company, right? And I do a lot of consulting on SBIR and STTR, tech transfer, helping people figure out pivots, markets. And before I started my company, I had about 12, 13 years experience in the SBIR and STTR ecosystem. As Ann mentioned, my first kind of intro into it was working for an organization, small business. And when I say small, I mean small. I was the 3rd hire, technically, after the CEO and president, the husband and wife team that founded the business, hired themselves. So I am used to the what does it take to actually start going after these? How do you have to pull together your resources? And kind of what is that time and energy effort of investment to be successful in SBIR and STTR? Then I transitioned from there when I went back to essentially school to get my MBA to working at a university and running SBIR and STTR programs, helping small businesses individually, helping them figure out what's my pathway here? Is this available to me? Which agencies do I go after? And one of the things that I always like to tell people, and this is actually highly relevant as we start guiding you through all of these different contracting agencies, the differences, what you need to pay attention to is across my time in working in SBIR and STTR, I stopped counting at like 700 businesses. It's probably closer to 800 businesses I've actually helped at this point. And out of those 800 businesses, I can count on one hand the number of businesses I've worked with who, based on what they're working on, based on their innovation, based on their idea, had one agency, one fit, one purpose, one customer. And that number is actually that number on one hand, 0. Everybody has multiple pathways. Everybody has multiple opportunities. It just takes thinking differently about what you're doing. And actually, we're going to dive into that topic a little bit deeper in one of our later, whether this is a workshop series, whether it's a cohort series, just one of our later presentations. But today, we're really diving into contracting agencies and kind of setting the stage for what's critical to know about contracts. Because in the SBIR and STTR world, you essentially have two different vehicles. You have agencies that do grants, and you have agencies that do contracts. But you do have two agencies that do both. They will be covered very, very shortly, or very, very quickly, as well as, shortly here. But for the most part, it's either a grant or a contract. And across SBIR and STTR, you have 11 different agencies that participate in these programs. You have a lot of differences between them, but when it comes to the actual vehicle of a grant versus a contract, there are a lot of things that, one, not only shift the focus and shift the future, depending on whether it's a grant or whether it's a contract, but entirely shift your approach. So if you've ever looked at these programs and gone, okay, well, what's my pathway here? And started working towards an ideal for going after a granting agency like NSF or USDA or NIH or one of those, and you've started making some plans, you've started making some pathways, maybe you started even writing some proposals and you went, yeah, I could transpose this information. Well, once you start going after a contracting agency, the amount of information you're going to transpose actually drops quite significantly because contracting agencies have a very specific intent when it comes to SBIR and STTR. But that's enough of the abstract thinking. Let's get into the nitty gritty of what we mean by an entirely different focus and purpose. So across contracting, when you think of SBIR and STTR, as I mentioned, there's 11 agencies that participate in SBIR and STTR. There's actually one agency splits it. The Department of Commerce actually runs NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, which is always a nice mouth of words to actually try to spit out, as well as NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. So it's technically 12 departments. And really half of those actually have contracts. Now, as Ann mentioned, a lot of the information we're going to give you over this, series of sessions, workshops, whatever, is really going to focus around Department of Defense, Department of War, and NASA. And you go, well, why is that? Because they're the 800-pound gorillas in the room when it comes to contracts. They are the vast, vast majority of the contracts. They have the bulk of the funding, they have the bulk of the money, and they offer the bulk of the opportunities. There are some smaller ones, well, what we would kind of consider smaller. Department of Homeland Security is kind of toes that line between almost being a bigger one, but actually being smaller because their window of opportunity crosses a lot of different things. DHS runs FEMA. They also run TSA. They run border and port security. They run the Coast Guard. There's a lot of different things. And then you also have Department of Transportation, which is sort of one of these smaller ones. They primarily work through contracts. There are maybe some one-offs every now and then that are grants, but Department of Transportation is a contracting agency. EPA also does a lot of their contracting. Most of what you see is actually a contract with EPA, but it's an entirely separate type of contract. So that's why we don't cover them a lot in details. But you just need to know if you get an award from EPA, it's going to be a contract with kind of a different purpose. So a lot of the information that we cover is that kind of level setting and stage setting for contracts. Most of it'll fit, but there will be some nuance. Across all of these, there will be some nuance. And the last one, and there's one, that's missing here a little bit, and I'll briefly talk about that. The last one that's kind of majorly in the area of contracts, but also actually does grants, is the Department of Education, which their SBIR agency within the department is actually called the Institute of Educational Sciences. And their contracts, again, it's a contract kind of in name. How they work it, how they operate it is kind of contract-like, but their purpose and their focus and the way they approach it is very kind of grant-like. And you're probably thinking, well, what do you mean between contract and grant-like, Del? Well, we're going to dive into that a little bit more. But we just want to give you this kind of setup so that you see that, yes, there's a lot of different contracting agencies, but even when you look at these different agencies, there's a lot of different stuff that they cover. DoD/DOW covers everything from healthcare to logistics to sensor arrays to systems to data to anything you can pretty much think of under the sun. Because I don't know if this is an actual totally factually true statement, but as far as I remember, they're still the largest employer in the US. They have a lot of warfighters, they have a lot of people, they have a lot of stuff that they have to think about. So they cover the vast array of things. NASA is primarily focused in space because, yeah, it's in their name. But you know what else they do? They also do things like healthcare. They do infrastructure. They do materials. You go, well, why healthcare? It's pretty hard to actually run out to, 7-Eleven and pick up some cough drops when you're on a rocket halfway to Mars. So they got to take care of astronauts. They got to take care of other people. And infrastructure, well, where do those rockets actually come from? Well, they fire off of bases that are across the nation. So they have a lot of buildings. They have a lot of things that they have to worry about. Logistics, controls, mission planning. There's a lot of those kind of software elements and integrating technologies that NASA does. But let's actually dive in just kind of a little bit more in depth into some of these agencies. So after we finish setting some kind of purpose and levels here. So really when you come down to it between contracts and grants, you have a mission basis versus a benefit basis. Grants are benefit basis. They want things to go out there to actually make people's lives better. Contracts want things that actually make their missions more dynamic, easier to control, better purpose, and better results. They fund solutions. Contracting agencies want to buy things from you. So granting agencies, they don't buy things. If you get awarded from USDA and you go through your phase 1 and phase 2 and you go, great, my customer is USDA. Nope, they don't buy things. They're not out there actually growing things. So why would they buy things? However, with someone like, DOW, they help you actually define what it needs to be. They help you define what it actually has to include. They help you define the requirements, the regulations, the controls, the restrictions, because at the end of it, they want to buy that solution from you. They know they have issues. They know they have problems, but they're not in the realm of creating their own things. They don't commercialize. They don't build, they don't really manufacture. They get other people to do it for them. So that's what a lot of what contracting agencies do. They have issues that are keeping them from achieving a mission, a focus, doing something for better results, less inputs, kind of whatever that is. And so they go out to the small business community and say, help us solve our problems. We'll actually fund you to do some research because these are all things that are, research based. And even though they do some research out there, and you can look at sites like TechLink and see that, hey, there's a lot of technologies out there that are available. They have a wide wide portfolio of patents. But you know what happens with those patents? They sit there. They just molder on a shelf. You know why I know that? Spent a couple of years working in tech transfer. Everything we had just sat there until someone came up and said, I think I can make something out of that. Perfect, because we ain't going to do it. So that's what contract agencies do. They want to get people in and start getting them ready for, okay, you helped us create this. You actually made it to the way we need it. Now you need to produce it for us. So the entire goal, and as Anne mentioned, particularly with sole source, the entire goal is that they help you. I was going to say string along, but that's actually not the right term there and bad term. But they help you plan, they help you focus, they help you kind of get to those stages that you can go, yes, this works. It's been in your hands. You've kicked the tires. You want to buy the car. By the way, we need you to deliver 10,000 cars a month to us for the next 3 years. So they're in that process of, all right, we got you to here. Now you need to scale. Now you need to stabilize. Now we want to make a sole source award to you. Because if they've injected funding into the development of the idea, they can actually use sole source procurement down the line to just buy it from you without having to go through the typical procurement process of, let's open up a solicitation. Let's validate it. Let's open it up to everybody. Are there specific set-asides we have to set? Okay, well, now we gathered them. Now we have to go through a review process. Now we have to go through initial contract stage setting. It allows them to just go directly to you and go, the government provided money so that you can build this. We know it's validated. We know it's verified. We know it works the way we need it to. Let's talk about how many of these you can give us a month or every cycle, every quarter, whatever, for the next X number of years.
Hey guys, actually Dale has a slide a little bit later. We'll talk about phase 3 and that sole source of non-competition, and I'll throw in a little bit of legalese at the time. But this is really kind of to emphasize really that differences. And also when you have that list, the contracting agency is mission driven, right? They have it, they want the contract, the vehicle, the award vehicle is different between a contract and a grant. That it's going to be different by agency, but really those focus and probably DHS, but they don't, I'm not sure if the funding has gone through quite yet. They don't have an open solicitation right now. DoD and NASA are the top that are going to actually probably an acquisition partner for you. The other ones, except possibly DHS, are not necessarily direct acquisition markets for you. So that is another emphasis why I, as kind of the program director, wanted to say, I just want to focus on really the two highest that are most important to the clients that I'm working with. But of course, if anybody here is interested in support, hey, there's transportation has an open opportunity right now. If those are aligned with you and things like that, or EPA, et cetera, we of course can support you, but we'll probably talk and focus much more about DoD and NASA in this series. And again,
Yeah.
differences between contracts. Part of the contract also, one little add to this is you notice that we had NIH in there. They have contract opportunities. Sometimes that definition of contract is they just wanted to put a clearer box around it, or a box around what they wanted people to submit, and more of a definition about what they wanted in terms of proposals. So that's one element why that contract vehicle may be used. And NIH has that. It's a very different type of vehicle than their normal granting awards. And, but it is because they want a very specific thing done. That's,
Yeah, that's just really, particularly for those agencies, it's more of the vessel that they use
yeah,
for because of regulations, because of controls, because of requirements, whatever is in kind of their operating modi for the agency itself requires them to use contracts, although they're not going to be a customer. And it mentioned someone like Department of Transportation. When you get a contract for Department of Transportation and you go, okay, well, who's my customer? It's actually not the federal Department of Transportation. It might be state level. It might be, construction organizations, but the federal Department of Transportation isn't going to be a customer. So that's kind of that difference maker that you need to know when you look at these different agencies for contracts is one of them. And that's again why we're focusing primarily on, DoD/W as well as NASA is primarily they are your customer. You're probably going to go out there and find other customers as well, which they actually require you to. That's part of their commercialization plans. But primarily, they are going to be that first entrant. Whereas those smaller contracting agencies, primarily, they are not going to be your customer. Secondarily, they are not going to be your customer. Tertiary, you can go down the line. They're just not going to buy things from you. You have to go out there and find somebody. So think of it as a more of that plan and that pathway for the future. These primary ones we're focusing on, they are that pathway for the future. You're getting to the I can sell this to you. Those secondary ones, you're going to get to a point. It's like, okay, well, good luck and Godspeed. We hope you find a customer out there and we hope you can actually start selling it to them. So that's kind of that way to think about it. But even with that, because of the manner that you do a contract versus a grant, there's a lot of the commonalities here when we talk about, putting together proposal packages, putting together information, the focus, the intent, how you write, and the quote unquote story you tell, which we're going to have a further session later on about actual technical storytelling. But a couple other things here about just contracting agencies as we're going through here. So contracting agencies have an entirely, again, kind of that different focus, not only for how they approach things, but what they really look for in a successful proposal package. You have to know that, particularly with contracting agencies, and again, this is very much answering the question of, well, how does someone like, defense or NASA look at stuff? Because they have problems that they want you to solve for them, you may think that you know what the problem is. You may think that you know how something needs to work, but it's probably wrong because they have their own understandings. There's a lot of things internal that they don't tell you about. You may be developing a very novel logistics system, and you approach someone like DLA, which is the Defense Logistics Agency, which is part of DoD, and they actually offer SBIR and STTR opportunities. And you say, well, it does this and it marks packages like this and it transports them that way. And they go, great. It's not the problem we have because the way we operate requires this. So one thing particularly to know about these, and you'll see it in full force when we start getting into specifically reading through some topics and understanding requirements, is that their topics and their needs are very, very heavily requirement based and requirement restricted. They'll tell you exactly what they need. They'll tell you exactly what goes on. But you still need to figure out some ways to actually validate that, some ways to look at information and how to express that you understand the problem. I recently read something and have had conversations about this, and the thing that people often get wrong, because these agencies are very solution focused, they want you to understand the problem and how to solve it, is when people approach that, they don't really make a problem statement. They give information, but that's not a problem statement. You can say that $450,000 are lost annually by this. That's not a problem. That's a statement. That's information. $450,000 are lost annually by this, which causes this, which impacts this. For it to be a problem statement, it has to be information plus impact plus outcome. So they want you to dig into that and they want you to dive into that because that's how they understand their own things. They understand their internal workings and how you make sure that you're playing out towards those larger issues that they have, those larger concerns. But it's always not, roses and rainbows. They know that, okay, well, people are approaching it this way, and you don't need to approach it the exact same way as somebody else is doing. On average, someone, like defense makes 2 to 3 awards per topic for a phase one. And you go, okay, well, if they want to buy one solution at the end, why are they doing that? Because stuff might not work out. Remember that phase one is testing feasibility. You're showing that that idea might actually work and produce results. Well, if they only award one phase one and that doesn't happen, what happens then? Well, they can't continue on because you're not going to be able to build a solution for them. So even if you get into that phase one, that's why there's a lot of outreach, contact, and control with these types of agencies, is that they need you to make sure that one, you fully understand, two, you know how to create a solution that matches their needs. And then third, you can actually produce because that scale up towards production and that scalability towards delivering can crush a lot of businesses just to figure out that, okay, well, we can make this, but we can't make enough that you need. So they kind of have to hedge the bets on, can people fully deliver this when we need them to deliver this? Now, a couple other differences here, and then we're going to dive into, I think very shortly, just kind of overlaying some of the different agencies here. But again, those topics are very built around the specific things. You'll see it when you look through a topic. It'll say, hey, this actual thing happens. This is how we need these to function. This is that form fit that we need to do. They are really looking for, and they give you kind of the objectives they want you to hit over the next, phase one, phase two, even a phase three. They want you to start planning that kind of 3 to 5 year pathway for, we're going to move from the phase one towards sole source. Even from the beginning, they want you to think about, okay, even though this is a feasibility for a phase one, how am I going to give you an end product, down the line? And essentially, what do I think is going to be, quote unquote, in the box? What are they actually buying from me? What does it include? What does it do? How does it work? What does it actually need? Because a lot of these are going to be very kind of forward facing, even though some of them are on the cutting edge of what are current problems. They kind of have to know the problem exists or are forecasting the problem. So a lot of this stuff may not see production for another 5, 10, maybe even 15 years. You may get an award, but before it's actually in process and actually in place, might be a longer time period because there's still, controls and things that they have to account for from their side before they can fully utilize it. And it is a definitive contract. So it is actually a legal agreement between you as the business and the contractee and whoever is funding this as the contractor. They're paying you to do something. So these are milestone and deliverable driven. At the end of the term, you have to deliver what they request. It's just like if you hire someone to do a kitchen remodel for you. They take 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, they say, hey, here's half a kitchen with a quarter of the tile. What are you going to do? Well, one, you're going to be pissed off. And two, you're going to probably take them to court. And that's what they expect. We paid you to do this. You have to get here. You have to show us that one, you can get there, but then two, you have to validate you're actually going to get there. Tell us how you're going to get there. Tell us why you're going to get there. You'll see a lot of that stuff when you create an actual compelling and complete proposal packages that address everything they need. And I kind of teed this up, but even with these primary contract agencies that are going to be your customer, they're going to be the first customer. They're not going to be the only customer. They want you to bring in an element of what they call green paint. And green paint is this thing that I developed for you. Here's what it is. Here's in the box. Here's this thing. But then they go, okay, well, sure, you'll have a procurement contract with us, but we expect you to grow big. We expect you to make hundreds of millions of dollars every single year. We're not going to pay you the hundreds of millions of dollars. We'll pay you a fraction of that. But where else are you going to go? So you have to start thinking about that. What is that pivot or that shift that gets me there? Really great example of this. And it's an example that you don't really find talked about a lot because even the company makes damn near no mention of it anymore is iRobot, the Roomba. Everybody knows the Roomba. Everybody knows, well, if you don't know what a Roomba is, you've definitely been living under a rock for a while. But a Roomba is a small autonomous vacuum that, paths and, goes and picks up dirt and cleans. And you go, well, why did DoD need that? They didn't. They needed explosive ordnance disposal robots. They needed robots that could remotely manipulate something. They needed to be able to scan terrain. They needed to be able to navigate across terrain. Well, they took those bases and they said, okay, well, let's combine them into a product. So a lot of the stuff that you do and a lot of the stuff that you see may be combinations, may be integrations, but it is we took this funded idea. It was a product for our contracting agency, our contractor, and then we had to figure out how to broaden it, maybe how to narrow it, how to shift it into a different area or a different region, and make a product that somebody out there wants and somebody will buy from us. And when they're talking about customers too, they're not only just talking about, okay, well, in the future, a derivative of this thing you made for us, you can walk into Walmart and pick up off an end cap. Other customers can be other federal agencies. They can be foreign governments. Well, as long as it's the right foreign government, right? Or, they can be, other partners. They could be primes like a Raytheon or a Lockheed or somebody like that. So it doesn't have to be okay, well, we have to figure out how to make this new weapons guidance system something that can be mounted on a Nerf gun for, better kid toys. Nope. Could actually be something for somebody else. Doesn't have to be this gets pushed out into what we consider the quote unquote commercial market. And again, because they're,
Oh, so go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought it was a good time to go ahead.
No. And again, because they are wanting to buy a solution from you at the end, there is going to be a whole heck of a lot of oversight.
Mhm.
Happens anytime you actually set up a contract to buy something from someone. You want to make sure that the work they're doing actually matches what you expect, matches the need, that they actually understand okay, if it needs to operate in this environment, if it needs to do this, if it needs to do that, you need to know that so you can actually do that super kind of baseline product development that eventually is going to match that kind of need benefit matrix. And because of that, you're going to be in contact a lot with them. Granting agencies, and this is another driving difference between those kind of vehicles is granting agencies, you get the funding, they set up an account for you to actually pull down from and spend. And, maybe you'll have an interim status report and maybe you'll have a final status report. But unless you specifically ask them something, they're not going to talk to you. They just go, hey, did it work out or not? If it didn't, oh, well, best effort. Nope. Contracting agencies are right there on your shoulder, at your hip. Where are you at? What's happened? Do you need more information? Did you validate this? Was this thing? Because again, they are that solution based. We need to make sure you understand exactly how this operates, how it interfaces, the size it needs to be, the maximum weight, power requirements, distribution requirements, even to integrate into our logistics chain, which you may go, okay, well, why is that a big thing? Well, if they can't internally ship it anywhere, what's the point of it? They have to go through that mechanic. They have to go through their own requirement there. So there's a lot of that kind of oversight and almost the control that's going to happen from that. And you really need to understand that before you go, is a grant or a contract really the right vehicle for me in SBIR and STTR?
When I was just on a conversation actually, Dell, Kelly Kiernan, because her CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. We'll talk about that again later, especially for DoD, for those of you interested in DoD. It's a key thing, and we're going to have Kelly do a webinar later on this summer or into the fall. But she also had been with the SBIR programs of both Air Force and Navy. And one thing, keeping in mind in this, what Dell was talking about, your opportunity at phase 1, or if you go in at direct phase 2, is to deliver on your proposed project, but also to get to know your acquisition partners there. 80% of sales, coming from a sales background, is getting to know how your customer buys and everything you can understand about that. Is it easy? No. But is it what you want to do? Absolutely. And this is an incredible opportunity for you to really start making those relationships, because we have heard of companies that really haven't taken advantage of that. They've had a DoD contract at phase 1 and they don't go on to phase 2. And I would say probably a good portion of it was not because, and they say, hey, everything worked. They just didn't do the additional work to make sure that they were setting themselves up to really be considered a good acquisition partner from the other part. One thing about Navy, for example, Navy has the highest transition rate of all of the components. And I've heard it said before, Kelly reiterated it in our conversation. She said, they don't issue a phase 2 unless they have someone on the other end. And she did this kind of thing with a catcher's mitt, right? Basically ready. They're saying, we want this. We want this project to go into phase 2 because we are ready. Navy puts topics out for things that they want. They definitely want. Air Force has experimented with a little bit broader look at that. And so sometimes those are harder. More specific topics maybe put more constraints on you, but you at least feel like, hey, they're asking for something here, very particular. They're looking to buy a solution for a problem. So keep that in mind when we're talking about DoD and NASA.
So now we've kind of gone through a little bit of like level setting and stage setting for contracting agencies. We're going to go through kind of a snapshot of a lot of these different agencies, as well as a snapshot of information. So a lot of the like further slides from here on out are going to be kind of a really quick treatment. You'll see that there are like little icons for computers or arrows baked into these. And these are links to the outside. So when we talk about, like, for instance, we're about to talk about, did I skip a slide? Yeah. Well, we're about to talk about defense, and the link here will take you to DSIP, but we don't need to show you DSIP. We'll give you the information about it. And these are, hey, here's something for you to start to explore. So just to kind of know that these are all baked into the slides. When you get the copy of the slides, they should theoretically work. We'll make sure of that before they go out to people.
I'll make sure I put it in. I'll just actually spell out the link on this just before I send it.
Okay. So a couple of the highlights here. When we talk defense, again, defense covers pretty much everything imaginable. They have a lot of stuff they do. They employ a lot of people. They're all over the world. There are a lot of things that they need to look at. And a lot of it is going to be kind of those integration styles. There's a lot of moving parts here. So even if it is something you're working on that you go, well, why would defense need this? It's an AI platform that actually tracks something. Well, might that be of interest to them? Sure, they got a lot of stuff that they need to track, but they're interested in, logistics, materials, healthcare, sensors, nutrition, if I said that right. They're interested in pretty much everything under the sun. But again, they primarily operate on that focused topic model. They do have some more open things where they go, hey, just tell us what you're working on. But even for that, with most of what they call service components, which are those, just call them pillars under DoD/DOW, like Navy Air Force, DLA, DHA, on and on and on and on. Even with those, a lot of those are kind of okay, well, we're looking for any idea as long as it relates to this big area. We're looking for any idea as long as it relates to sensor integration. We're looking for big ideas as long as it relates to human systems integration and human systems factors, something like that. So even though DoD looks at a wide variety of stuff, and the release schedule now is the first Wednesday of every single month, topics drop, you still have to play that kind of hunting game with DoD. What are they actually looking for? What's this? What's out there now? Is there something I can address? Is there something I can answer? So it'd be very important to sign up for the mailing list, which we have links for the mailing list for all of these agencies. But just know that kind of set yourself up for every first Wednesday of the month. I'm going to go to DSIP. I'm going to look at topics. I'm going to see if they want something within this overall focus area that I may be able to match. NASA, like, defense/war is very broad again, too. They have a lot of systems, they have a lot of things, they have a lot of controls, they have a lot of oversight, they have a lot of planning. So they are, broad like defense, but there's a lot of still science behind them because it's very scientific to shoot a rocket into space and actually have it come back okay, or have the people on it, come back just fine. So there's a lot of that science that's actually involved in NASA, even though they do kind of go outside the box. They don't go outside the box a lot. They are still very mission driven. So even with the solutions they're looking for, even with okay, well, they need something in logistics. It's a very specific kind of subset of logistics. They're looking at, okay, we have this very specific logistics of how this one part is manufactured and gets into the Orion shuttle, or kind of whatever it is. So even though they do look broad, it's almost that oxymoron where they look broadly across a lot of things, but they're still kind of siloed within that, where it's like this specific utilization, this specific use case, this specific deliverable, this specific goal, kind of whatever that is. NASA also changed up their schedule. When we talk about schedules, we would usually be able to say, okay, well, their release here. NASA flipped the game this year when they went to a BAA and said, we're going to do appendices. And they're expecting, to almost do it quarterly. They said 3 a year. The first 3 dropped the same exact day with the same exact due date. They're probably going to release more because those were in the backlog, but just know that, NASA has actually shifted where it's no longer the pretty much 1 a year release that you get with NASA. Now, DHS is a little bit of kind of, I would almost call an anomaly whenever you are looking at these primary contracting agencies that are buying solutions for themselves. That's because DHS does look at a wide range of things, but they don't look at a wide range of things at the same time, because their wide range is really dependent on the operational arms and units within DHS. I mentioned earlier that Coast Guard is part of DHS, FEMA is part of DHS, TSA, even Secret Service. And each one of those has such a very specific focus and a very specific goal that they may be looking at kind of interest areas. They may be looking at things they kind of need to plan for. They may be looking at protection and force assets, kind of whatever it is. But they're on that kind of rotating basis where what happens a lot of times in DHS is one of these, let's call them sub-factors within DHS, is at the forefront of the funding that year. So within a year, FEMA might not have any topics and everything might go under TSA, or most of the stuff might go under FAA, and Coast Guard might get a little bit love, but nobody else. So DHS is a real, let's almost say it's a scattershot or a shotgun, where it's like, okay, DHS looks at a lot of things, but it is super driven by what are the priorities this time around and what is their I would even call it almost just their interest rate this time around. So even though there's a lot of stuff across DHS, you got to know that you just have to be on the ball with looking through the topics and also doing that outreach because DHS is really great about that program manager outreach ahead of time to see what they think the priorities are, where this is going, what's of interest, and almost really pay attention to news cycles, although it's probably the last thing anyone wants to do at this point. But know what has been going on and where their interest areas might lie for the future.
Yeah, and right now, guys, we don't know. I don't have any word on the street as to when DHS is going to release their solicitation. I put in the chat. Again, just you'll have these slides. I'm going to send out the PDF with the links to each of those sites, just as an FYI. You can send me appendix as well. But just with their topic areas, that gives you a look at what, when Dell's talking about this kind of oxymoron, this very broad but narrow focus within each of those. There's all of the types of areas that DHS has, from unmanned systems to border patrol, et cetera. They very different types of areas, but this is a great time for you, for any of these agencies, to start doing this research and talking about that. But yeah, go ahead and we'll talk about Department of Transportation. Again, it currently has an open solicitation right now.
Yeah, DOT is currently open. Again, DOT is kind of that contracting agency, but they're not almost a primary offering because, as is stated on here, as we stated earlier, DOT doesn't really buy things from you. And those kind of expectations are actually baked into those topics. They're wanting you to think about the longer range, longer scale. Even in some of those topics, it might actually require you during a phase one to do a economic viability or an ecosystem analysis for when I create this thing, who might be a partner, who might be a customer, who might be a beneficiary. They are very forward focusing and forward thinking on where is this going to go because we ain't going to buy it. You better find somebody to buy it. So that's one of the big difference makers with DOT. And DOT, I would say, is narrow focus, but wide impact. Because when it comes to DOT, anything that moves or is transported is what DOT is interested in. But that includes cars, that includes trucks, that includes planes, that includes railways, that even includes gas. So they handle, gas pipelines. They handle, things like water pipelines, infrastructure. So anything that moves, anything that is transported, transitioned, whatever that is, DOT might be interested in. But again, their topics, what they are interested in, their topics are, we want to see technologies in this area with a couple constraints, but because they're not the customer, they don't tell you the requirements. They don't tell you exactly what it has to do. They don't tell you exactly what the end goal is. It's, we want betterment in these areas, like highway safety traffic monitoring. However you come up with it, whatever impact it does, as long as it has an impact, sure, we might fund it. But you have to sketch out that impact and that benefit that somebody is going to get and why they might buy it. But more importantly, who might buy it. Because at the end of the day, that is the primary function of SBIR and STTR. And then we're going to really gloss over EPA and IES here because they have what they have. So again, EPA is a contracting agency. It's a lot of environmental stuff, as you would expect. So monitoring, remediation, improvements. EPA doesn't really have one of those, unlike these other agencies, one of those, oh, gotcha, you wouldn't think that we did this. It involves the environment, it involves protecting the environment. That's EPA. That's pretty much all they do. They are also, even still at this time, well, besides IES, they are also the smallest agency. Give the least amount of funding, give the least amount of words, get the least amount of funding. So EPA is kind of very hit or miss. And again, because they are not that direct purchaser, their topics are going to be very, almost like a granting agency. They're going to be across a domain, and a specific domain, but however you improve that domain is entirely up to you to make that convincing argument for EPA. And IES is a strange bird.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that they do and a lot of the stuff they require, again, they are set up as a contracting agency, but the Department of Education doesn't follow it. You have to sell to schools, you have to sell to superintendents, you have to sell to school districts, you have to sell to after school programming. So anything that improves education, educational impacts, and educational outcomes is an IES project. And it might actually be able to be funded by IES. But it has to be that very, let's just call it metrics-based measurement. IES is really not interested in qualitative improvements. They want quantitative improvements. How does this actually work? What does it do? How does this move this forward? So as you're looking at, if you're working in educational technologies, there's only a handful of agencies, actually less than a handful, probably 3 agencies that might be educational technologies. So if you're looking at IES, it's also one of those think broader and think bigger. Could your same technology be used for workforce training? Could it be used in some other area besides just the school system? Because IES is one of those, they're a great partner when it comes to SBIR and STTR, but because they're very kind of constrained, it's probably a look at other factors, look at other agencies, and look at other customers. And we mostly covered all of this information, but just kind of just a couple of key points to remember is that when it comes to things like contracting agencies and knowing your customer, those contracting agencies that buy things, again, are that first customer. They're not that only customer, but you're going to still have a difference with those agencies between a customer and an end user. The customer is the one that actually writes the check. The end user is the person that's actually using it. So you're going to almost have 2 masters when it comes to those types of efforts. You have to do something and deliver it to what the customer expects and kind of what's in that solicitation. But when it actually comes to developing that idea into a product, you have to make sure that the end user can use it and it benefits the end user. So particularly when you're doing one of those contracts that is a customer driven because they are the customer at the end, you not only need to listen to that buyer or payer, but you need to listen to the person that's actually using it, and they'll bring in those people for you to do field testing, for you to do A/B testing, kind of whatever that is. There's going to be that expectation that you're going to make those rapid transitions between phases from the, we went for this, we showed it, now we need to prototype it. It's going to require this, it's going to require access to this, it's going to require these things that actually make it need to work in the field or in the theater, wherever it's actually being deployed. And we talked about that kind of, transition, but just to make sure that people are almost, let's just call it on board with what we mean, by transitions here. So that transition is that pathway towards people in the field and people in the government are actually going to be able to, 1, buy it, but then actually 2, utilize it. It's almost those gateways between, if you reach this point, we know you can continue on and we know you can kind of do those things. And when stuff is actually in the field, we will call that deployed. Deployed actually comes from comes after transition. An award is just an award. That transition is moving on to that phase 3 kind of sole source procurement aspect. And deployed means you actually started producing them at scale and producing them how they needed to actually be able to put them out there in the field. We can skip over commercialization because we talked about that and hammered that one home. But you really need to understand what transition means when you're thinking about even your phase 1 response. And a lot of the phase one response, they want to know, well, how are you going to transition this? And the way you describe that is, how are you going to tap into the things we can enable, the things we can give you, and the abilities that you can actually utilize to make sure that you don't reach a milestone and there is no ability to actually move forward. There's no ability to continue on. You need to be aware of these things. And that's why, particularly when you're answering towards, this is a lot of times, well, primarily this is defense, but it also happens a lot with NASA, is you have to do that background homework. What are they doing? What are they funding? Who's interested? What are these, programs like OTAs, other transactional authorities that you can tap into that are going to make sure that if we provide this quote unquote seed investment, because remember, what are SBIR and STTR? Seed funds, that you're going to grow it into something we can actually use down the line and use to the full extent that we want to use it.
And we'll talk about that in much more detail, guys. In that week, I can't remember which week it is. We have one session that is specifically focused on that commercialization sections of these proposals. And we'll talk to you in much more detail about that, but you'll actually see that thread throughout all of the series, because that really is really an important part of what the seed funding is supposed to do, is leverage that ability to transition. And that is a very specific thing that we talk about when we're talking about DoD or NASA, is that transition of your technology into that program. They're actually using it. They bought it, they sold it, and then they're deploying it. So you don't usually hear about transition in the regular civilian marketplace, but it is very much a term that you use for DoD and NASA.
Yeah, and that's also one of the things too, when you're thinking transition, is you have two layers of transition here. You have transition for this, primary customer, or, this primary whoever it's going to be. But then again, remember, you have to think about that transition into other areas, into other worlds. So as you're thinking about the future under one of these contract awards, you're doing that almost split level consciousness. I like to call it an oxymoron of walking a tightrope, because on one hand, you have to think narrow. How am I going to make this exact product to this exact need? But you also have to think broader, where you go, okay, well, what is the baseline here that I can go slap something different on it, put it into something else, change it up in this way, that there is that potential for that customer and commercial transition, that market transition. Remember, they want things that can actually reach a broader market than just them. So you're going to have to start thinking about, what are these stage points where I can say, okay, this thing I'm developing for NASA specifically, I got it to here. You know what? They don't need this added element. But if I added that, that might be great for a space enthusiast, or that might be great for satellite systems technicians in Space Force, or that might be great for these other people. So not only are you thinking about those kind of stage gates and those future plans for your transition between phases, with like a phase one, phase two, or phase three, and those transition points to, what do I need to continue this development? But also those transition points where, okay, I've got here, is there something here that I can start to capture that might be interesting to the outside market? Because that commercialization that we're talking about, that kind of market commercialization, or that, customer commercialization, that outside commercialization, you don't have to wait till the end of the phase two. You don't have to wait till accompanying funding. If you get to the end of the phase one and said, well, they don't need this, but somebody else might need this if I do this, commercialize whenever you can, commercialize however you can. Because even if you are getting that, SBIR funding for that continued development, doesn't mean that you can take that bait, or doesn't mean that you can't take that base, modify it, and start selling it to somebody. As long as it doesn't do things like ITAR restrictions and stuff like that, where they go, hey, you can't make that. You have to remove this feature.
We'll talk about that next, when we look at a couple of specific topics next week. We'll look at what considerations you might have, in which topics may make sense. But Yeah. And also part of the reason they want you to have this transition, this focus on on selling not just to them. I may make an exception. If you're Lockheed Martin, well, one, you're too big for a small business, but if you're like that and you're selling already, and that's kind of your main focus, that's maybe an exception. If you're a small business, they want to know that you're going to stay in business. They would like you. They want you to be that contractor for them, but they don't want you to be reliant on them. And especially NASA. NASA might buy 5 of your things, right? They just don't typically have a high quality or high quantity requests. DoD will probably have high quantity requests in many situations, but you really have to weigh that. And so they want to make sure that you're doing what you need to do to stay in business because they would like you to still be their vendor. So that's really kind of one of the key things. It's not just because we want to share this with the world. They really want to make sure that you're staying in business there.
Yeah, because their budgets are constrained every year. Their budget is whatever their budget is, and the budgets are in those categories. And when you deal with, there's a concept called the color of money. When you deal with those specific budgets, guess what? It's down to that penny. That's not oh, well, we need this. We decided. Okay, cool. Hope you can get it in the next budget because you ain't getting more money from us. Um, and as Ann mentioned, they're going to buy probably a limited amount. Scott Dockham was a NASA SBIR. He wasn't a program manager. He was something in SBIR. He's been in a lot of agencies at this point. He's no longer with NASA. I think he's with DOT, someone like that.
I don't know where he is now. You're right. Yeah, he is somewhere else.
But Scott always used to say, and Scott always spoke at like Tech Connect and, the space events for NASA. And he always used to go, NASA buys 6, one to bake, one to break, one to put on a shelf, and whatever the other 3 are, I can't remember right now. But he would always go, NASA buys 6. How are you going to sell more than 6? You go to the outside market and you start to do that dual use, which again, you want to start thinking these concepts early, even as you're planning like a phase 1 response. Mm-hmm. Where are those gaps? Where are those stage points? Where are those kind of endpoints where I can critically look at what I've been developing and say, okay, this is what this agency needs because they're my primary customer. But again, they're not your only customer. So what is that shift I can do? Where is this that I can actually look for the outside world, for these other opportunities, for these other vehicles I can use, probably besides SBIR or STTR, or maybe a different agency under SBIR or STTR that might be interested in this version versus this other version. And this actually happens in every aspect of business. I mean, critically, if as a business, everything you develop, you're not looking at the other potential customers, the things you can modify on it and actually sell it to someone new, sell it to someone different, sell it to other people. I hate to be harsh, but you're failing as a business. These are things that you should be doing anyways, but you really need to do it in these, proposals and addressing these responses because the government understands that. The government understands how business should be done. Now, they may understand a different way of how business should be done, the small business ecosystem way, but they understand how business should be done. So if you can't show them you understand those foundations, why are they going to provide a seed investment to a business they don't think is going to make it? This becomes super important in getting a winning proposal. And this actually follows up with right what I was talking about. There is a cost of doing business for government contracting. So these are all things that you just kind of need to have in mind and brought up, CMMC, being able to handle specific information, being able to handle restricted information, being able to even things like, cover your own costs because these are reimbursement based. You have to invoice the government before they pay you. These things like these delays, these systems you have to put in place, they're going to be if you went out there and got a contract with anybody else besides the government. If you went out there and got a contract with my business, but I don't contract with other people, you ain't being my customer, but or, I'm not being your customer. But even if you did, you know what happens? You incur a cost, you develop something. I say, great, you send me an invoice and it's a net 30 invoice. I got 30 days to pay. So just know that the government does business just like, well, mostly just like other businesses do. So have that understanding that there's a cost to doing government with the or doing business with the government, but at the heart of it, it's a cost that you're going to have to carry if you do business with anybody else. Just make sure that you're aware and make sure that you're set up so that you can take advantage of these opportunities for your success. So now we're going to dive into just kind of a high level overview of some of these programs. So we still have a few slides to get through, but we getting close to the end. So we covered this, earlier. There is the normal phases of SBIR and STTR. That phase two, geez, the phase one is the feasibility. Can this even work? It's really focusing on demonstrating that you know how a solution might need to work for them. You fully understand the problem and you have an idea of how to actually solve the problem. And that phase one is actually really focused on testing it out. Can this idea work? Is there some grounding? Is there some focus? Do our principles of how we understand, science or whatever kind of actually support this? Like if your solution addresses breaking the laws of thermodynamics and making a perpetual motion machine, no, that ain't going to happen because scientifically we know that the probability of that working might as well be a meteorite hitting a lotto winner as they fall off the planet and end up in the sun. So there has to be that basis in reality and that basis in research that says this should potentially work. And then in that phase two, you're moving on to actually showing that. In that phase one, you demonstrated that this might work. Now you're in a phase two, you're actually putting that into practice. It's going to be a lot of testing, a lot of revision, a lot of actually, reinforcing, refactoring. There's going to be those validation points where you go, okay, I showed it can work. Now I'm starting to get to what they would prefer is a market ready prototype at the end of the phase two. Are you going to get there? Probably not. If you're actually producing something that is hardware development takes a long time and a lot of money to get it completely and totally right. But they want something that's really demonstratable. They don't want an idea of a concept at the end of the phase two. They don't want something that's held together with duct tape and baling wire and hopes and prayers. They want something that they go, yeah, I could actually see us using this. I can actually see it being tested out. I can see it being demonstrated. It might not be there that, you can take this and make 10,000 a month price, but you're close. You're almost there. That's what that phase two, is focusing on. And then kind of as that almost, I would even almost, let's call it a bridging point. You have things like direct to phase twos. Direct to phase twos are not a guarantee. Direct to phase twos don't happen by everybody. Direct to phase twos are very dependent on agency, component, organizational office within the agency, whatever. But a phase two or direct to phase two actually skips a phase one. It's a leap over that barrier of a phase one, and you go, I don't need a phase one. I'm ready for a phase two. Well, what's that require? You have to demonstrate that anything, and I mean anything, you think you would have need to do in a phase one to establish feasibility, you've already accomplished at your own expense, on your own dime, heck, on somebody else's dime, as long as you have the IP rights for it. But it covers the vast gamut. So a lot of people see, well, I'll just go to a direct to phase two. But because you're moving now from a, maybe $250,000 seed investment to a $2 million seed investment, guess what? There'll be a lot of things you're going to have to address because that is super risky at this point. So you have to demonstrate that anything that might actually provide risk, you have already addressed. So even though technically a directive phase 2 exists. Personally, when I work with people, I go, you really don't want to do a directive phase 2? And they go, yes, I do. And I go, good luck. There's only a handful of those that actually succeed, because anytime anybody looks at these, the first thought is, what else could you have done? What could you have done differently? And what could you have tested out in a phase 1? They don't really, this may be me standing on a soapbox and, yelling at clouds here, but they don't really like to kind of skip over that phase. They want you to color inside the lines when it comes to the phases. So that's why that barrier is so much higher. But if you can show that we already have a system, we're actually utilizing something like dual use, we have something that's fully fielded. Now we just need to slightly customize it for your benefit to answer your, needs, to actually address your specific problem in a specific way that you need it addressed. You might be able to win a directive phase 2, but that is what it requires.
I'll say a couple of things too, just on that too. I did for a minute, I was like, no, NASA doesn't have it. No, yes, they do. They do have one. And those directive phase agencies that I put on that side are just the contracting agencies. There are granting agencies that have directive phase 2 as well, NIH in particular, actually. But just as an FYI. And also another little level on that directive phase 2 to consider that. We obviously can help you if you're thinking about that. Dell is absolutely right. That it's really that you have a functional prototype, probably, or something very close to it. And the next step is to make it ruggedized for the DoD, or very specific to low Earth orbit applications, something like that, if it's appropriate. And also one thing to keep in mind, and again, not to discourage you, but if you're a brand new company, know that very often those technical points of contact already have someone in mind when they are considering a directive phase 2. That doesn't mean it's seeded. It doesn't mean that it's slated for that company, but they know that there's something out in the current state of the art. If it was undeveloped yet, it'd be more of a phase 1 opportunity probably. But when it's a directive phase 2, they kind of have an idea that, hey, people are creating solutions, and we want them to make sure that they bring that more mature solution to address our needs. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to go for them, go all in. Make sure that you have very, very clear commercialization plan. You really have spelled out everything that you've done to confirm the feasibility. And then you have a very clear plan for what you think is the next level of technology development that's needed for that. And you're going to only have specific topics that are identified as directive phase 2 topics. My 2 cents. Thanks, Doc.
Before we jump into this slide and information, just a kind of small foil to what Anne was just stating. I totally agree that they already have something in mind, but I would add the foil that they don't necessarily have a company in mind. They have a solution in mind, because this solution has been shown to them by a company. Doesn't necessarily mean that you can't come in and go, well, you saw this, I can do it better. Because I have seen that happen dozens upon dozens of times. Hell, the business I worked at, we actually won a couple awards away from incumbents where they said, we're looking at buying this thing or buying this system, but we need to make sure other people can't deliver. And we go, well, we can deliver it better. We can deliver it cheaper. We could deliver the same exact thing. And they went, cool. You won the award. Let's talk. So they do have that idea of something. And it's really that somebody's already shown them a solution that they can go, hey, with some minor tweaks, we can actually use this. So that's also why that phase 2 or directive phase 2 is kind of an uphill battle, because someone's already demonstrated something to them that they go, damn, I want that. I need that. They've actually changed that want into that need. And they go, all right, well, we need to actually put out a directive phase 2. So again, not to discourage people, but just to, throughout all of these presentations and weeks, we're going to be doing a lot of just foundation setting for people, and just to set that foundation and set that stage for you, kind of understand what that looks like. But let's wrap up here with the final couple of or final handful of slides. Because a
Yeah,
lot of this stuff is looking more towards the future rather than what do I need to do now? What do I need to do today? And this slide really addresses more of that. What do I need to do in the future? You know, when you're thinking of the phases, there's also these transition phases. You have the phase three, which technically there is no phase three SBIR STTR. So when they talk phase three and they talk about SBIR and STTR being a three-phase program, the phase three is you going out there and finding funding. Now, if you're working with one of these primary customer-driven contracts, a lot of times they can help you find the funding, and they can actually maybe bring the funding to the table, but they are non-SBIR dollars. And sometimes they require even things like matching awards. But that phase three is for that further customization kind of towards their needs. Then you have a, potential transition like procurement. Procurement's actually where you're trying to get. Procurement is just the essential, whereas a phase three might still require some tweaking. Procurement is just a straight out purchase. They buy it from you. So procurement is kind of what you're getting towards, where it's like not, we still need to tweak this, we still need to modify this. Somebody now just wants to buy this from us. So that procurement is a specific product that's tied to a specific something like a program of record, which is the way that like defense and a lot of these direct customer contracting agencies purchase things. They have to have a program of record that says we can buy things under this. And then procurement is great, but procurement, the way they define procurement, also brings in the now we need to make this open to other people. The type of procurement that you're really looking for is that sole source. Again, that sole source is direct purchase directly from you without any competition involved. And anybody that has had SBIR, STTR funding kind of doesn't matter the phase, although, I mean, you got to have something amazing to actually get a sole source off of phase one. That really ain't going to happen. But it's going to happen off of like phase twos or phase two extensions. That sole source, you can actually use any agency, can be SBIR, can be STTR, theoretically could be a phase one. Most of the time it's going to be a phase two or a companion phase two, or maybe some type of supplement phase two. But if you have had SBIR funding that helped develop the product, the government can use sole source procurement to buy it directly from you. Doesn't need to be that particular agency for them to buy it. Doesn't need to be that particular operational arm actually within that agency, or for someone like defense, that service component. If you use Navy funding to develop something and all of a sudden our Air Force goes, hot damn, we can use that too. They can use sole source to buy that from you. So that's one thing to know about. The other reason why it's really great to start to pursue these programs is the ability to sell directly to customers is kind of inherently tied into either this program or very similar programs like some aspects of long range BAAs.
and that link there, guys, more details on, it's not just as easy as saying, hey, I got an SBIR, I get this sole source or this no competitive thing. Watch that video. It's only about an hour long, and you will learn so much more about how to make sure that you're doing that. And we'll probably bring other elements of that into the future conversations as well. And I know we just have 5 more minutes, so I'll let kind of Dell kind of wrap up, and then I think we can kind of some of the follow-on slides you'll see, and again, we'll pick up a lot of these conversations in the next set of sessions.
Yeah, we're just going to flip through the rest of these slides, but they quick treatment because you have these transition points, but also know that there are supplemental and complementary funding that you can actually use. There are ones that focus on that tech development, like that'll kind of get you over that hump into that phase 3 pathway, like TACFI, StratFi, Navy as STP, Army Catalyst, phase 2Es from NASA. These are again focused on that the phase two didn't exactly maybe turn out all the way we needed it to. Let's continue a little bit of development, but now you have to pony up some like skin in the game as well. It's been all us so far. Now you have to show that you're willing to continue this development. And then there are also commercial transition efforts. All of these are really focused on okay, the tech is there, but what is this commercialization that needs to be? You have programs like X-Tech from Army, Ignite from NASA, which I assume it's still out there. There's been some, who knows kind of what's going on. Our commercial solutions opportunities from Air Force. These are more focused on those very dual use purposes where we already have something. Now you need to actually commercialize it for this specific agency, which means transition that technology you already have into their use case, their aspects, what they need to know, and their specific requirements. And a couple of just kind of real quick points here on knowing about these different phases is agencies really want you to, follow what they want and follow the guidelines. So that's kind of matching towards what we talked about, things like direct to phase two. Some of these that are very tech focused, like phase 2E, if you bring in a large portion of commercialization into your proposal, guess what? You're going to fail because the commercialization is not focused there. The commercialization is that tech. So there are specific programs and specific follow-on, supplementary, complementary funding for transition of technology and for tech development. There are specific ones for commercial. Keep those separated, keep those firewalled. And just know that the big portion of those commercialization is one, a lot of that is going to be that kind of scalability towards that manufacturing. But then two, a lot of probably still a decent chunk of that is going to be how do we start to actually push this out to the outside world and to what that high bar for that outside commercial potential is going to be. So the schedules here, we're just kind of giving you the typical schedule for how these contracting agencies work because we can't give you release schedules because release schedules are all over the board. Again, defense releases topics every single Wednesday or the first Wednesday of every single month. NASA, their appendices will drop when the appendices drops. DHS does once a year, but now it's shifted. Who knows when that's going to be? But just for you to kind of know is that when those topics drop, they're initially in what they call a pre-release. You have feedback. You can contact the TPOCs. You can ask questions, but you can't submit a proposal. And then they go into an open status after about 30 days. And that open status means, okay, well, now you can submit, but guess what? You can't talk to a TPOC because if we need to make some changes to this, that happened during the pre-release. So topics can actually disappear during the open, topics can change, information can change. So it's that stage gate where after that 30 days, make sure you double check to see if anything has been different or anything has been shifted or changed. And then once that open, you have about 30 days until you submit. And when we say closed, we mean closed. If it is 12 p.m. Eastern and you submit at 12:01 p.m. Eastern, guess what? You have failed administrative review. It is returned without review. Nobody looked at it. Some paper pusher at REI Systems who runs the DSIP clicked a flag and it went right back to you. And that's it, the only person that ever saw that. So make sure you hit those. We're going to get to the wrap up now, just talk about some of the slides, because this is just really a kind of early stage setting. As Ann mentioned, you'll see this in the slides when we send it out to you. But this is just letting you know about a couple first steps, which we're going to dive more into next week when we look at topics anyways.
Yeah.
Yep, we are not doing a live look. That takes up way too much time.
Yeah. Yep.
But just a high level kind of reminder of what we talked about here in a summary. Just keep in mind that contracting agencies are vastly different than granting agencies. So know that based on the agency you're looking at and based on kind of where you're thinking in the future, it is going to shift the work you do, the work you need to do, and how you actually even plan around this. And agencies invest today for something 5 to 10 years from now. So kind of keep that in mind. If you're thinking that I'm going to get an award and for the next 3 weeks, I'm going to be selling something to defense, not under SBIR or STTR, you ain't. Maybe, look at a procurement, look at something else. But these are long range goals because they need to validate in every single way that the product they are putting money into for development will actually meet their needs. And those needs might shift between a phase 1 to a phase 2, or a phase 2 to a sole source, or even within your phase 2. They might have an operational change that means you need to be able to roll with the punches. So keep that in mind, particularly with these contracting agencies, is even though they're not flexible, you have to be extremely flexible. That is going to finish us out for this week. As Ann mentioned, there's actually some appendices slides that you're going to get with here that has a lot of resources, a lot of links, kind of a good overall strategy for that first start. Next week, we're going to dive into actual looking at topics, knowing how to look at information, and looking at what their actual needs and requirements are. Okay, so it can be hard to pick out those diamonds in the rough that you need to shine and make sure are brilliant in your proposal package to have a winning proposal. But we have a couple of, just suggestions for some homework that you can do to start to set yourself up. Start looking at these different agencies based on the links that we provided in here and that are going to go out to you. Look at who might be interested in what you're going to do and start to look at, if I'm going to address this, what are these kind of stage gates I need to think about? Because being able to identify and address those transition points really is going to be critical for your future success with these programs, and not only with these programs, but I would even dare to say it with your company itself.
And I know we've kept you over a little bit, guys. Thank you so much for hanging on here, guys. We will see you hopefully next week. For any of you, I would also add, if you are looking at the Department of Defense, and DCIP again, we'll set those out again. If you think DoD is one of your market areas, I am going to probably suggest that you take a look at what's currently available now. Because if there is something available now, we can talk a little bit about that more in detail. Individually, I don't talk about that generally with everybody here, but we can meet one-on-one and talk a little bit more about the paths there. But also this series will actually help you in the process, even if you want to submit in July 24th, the next due date, next realistic due date, I think 24th or 22nd, or maybe in the August submissions if we're teeing up for something down the road. But we'll talk some more there. But thanks everybody for joining. Thanks for hanging on. 4 minutes past the hour. But we will see you next week. And I'll send these slides out to you shortly. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Ann. Thanks, everybody. And see y'all same bat time, same bat channel next week.
Thank you.